下面是编的是差不多，上面是你的心理考试，然后
不是，哥们，我这等个2等到吗？妈了个逼的！哦，这他妈的我没打开，我靠！
One says, jump. Chris Levels 1 says, scram lil nigga. Fossabit says, Silky is 38 years old. Chrising says, I hate you. Nara0 is refunding my sub. The ONXT Door 1 says, got this big yeah. Iso Mali says, LMFAOO. Blade 478 says, the sky is 40. Off Breaks says, Pudgy Sun. JXMPSY says, SAS. Sia Cash says, 30 mil go play. JXMPSY says, WW. Hoodie Fly says, KR. Off Breaks says, they have to be bots. Enders Creature Show says, ha 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 ha. Redegbrian says, LMAOO. South 2426 says, Flossy Girl 58 says, OURWEIRDD. Big K35 says, God. Greg Too Smooth says, LMAOOO. The Onlisquare Kilometers 5 says, they already do. Reifa LDN says, NAHHH. You Luciano says, I see you updated your default settings after SU. It used to be 100k likes. Flossy Girl 58 says, on he's WEIRDD. Re-M Knox says, crack what? Tron GD says, Big Schemer WOOO. South 2426 says, what? Jamadar says, that nigga still ain't get his free haircut. Not Sack says, he see at Patrick Lemalu. Broken IMGZ says, the cashier wanna blow his shits move off. Ball Hug Trickster says, I hate that I laugh like yo bitch ass squirt bottle ass nigga at Silky. Works D says, those bags are gonna rip. Rudolph Breaks says, hashtag LC. 33 Wraiths says, who gon' push 2 cards. Dev55 says, GG.
Jesusito 510 diz. Tumor que lazer.
Sen says, W slave. Rudolph Breaks says, Rav. ITZ Joven says, nigga laser you paying mud. Air Iankadid Woda says, Ron Raid. Watch him 3 and says, Rav. Dev Gobelk says, STBL. Izo Mali says, laser you gotta pay. Cassia High School 12134 says, R. Casefber1 says, STBL. Sonic City says, stable raid. Nilsano says, stable. Hughsley Pie says, Ron I'm horny. Pig Mob says, STBL. Slamwood says, in getting stroked. M4 Lackey 3 says, STBL. Dev Gobelk says, how do we tell UTS not fitting? Kaiser Dark says, Rail. Back Special 10 says, HES reading chat. Joey 176,582 says, STBL. Yostpal says, SLG. SLG. French Free Sluffy says, Rail. DR Sasa says, W points method laser. My Nami Stem says, did you get Ace of Spades at Silky? Lil 2 Freaky says, Steno Riyadh.
French Free Sluffy mówi, Wright.
Caleb says, Ron Raid. Realbuklo says, damn. Caleb says, STBL. Greg Too Smooth says, WW. Stream Element says, 5 times stay blue combo. Jordan Nesso says, SILKYY. Stedler Ronaldo rated with 18,609 viewers. Rating with 18,609 viewers. Anelis888 says, Lock in man. Vexfix says, Stable EE. Angelk7 says, STBL. Yoyoyoyohi says, Rail. Selina Love 111 says, you could use that gift card now.
Ricecoker 18 mówi, Wright.
Tukizin says, Mogs UU. Rackbird says, well hello there Woo. Anelis888 says, can we get a Ron Silk stream this year or not? Nai21 says, was, still is. Minimon Spitting Popcornl says, come here skill. Crystal Shira 08 says, RT. Tuteha says, she don't even write her music. YVL her says, obviously. Cave Lone says, everyone's stream is AHHHTDYIDC except you. Zablitzim says, can't believe you just said THT. Realbukmo says, cheese. Did a switching today at 5 says, type STBL if you're DIH small. Newpack says, strut ass nigga. Sleaze says, W business expense. And Trapping says, back at the floor. Hollow Pix 3LL says, rain. Out the way says, IK this nigga looks crazy third person. TXRB1 says, left a bag. Natamax says, WTFF. Nai21 says, laser. Russ00 says, laser bag. Spinamaged says, UH. Ibrahim 2092 says, left a bag. ITZSTSI says, you forgot a bag. Head Crank says, STBL raid. Trulimir says, yo dumbass you left a bag. Mo the King 84 says, left a bag. Head Crank says, STBLL. Redrum 5280 says, no it was a ripped one. SLG Bleach says, bro. Skill issue 101 says, jump. LB100X says, NAH they buggin'. Eblehem says, holy. Galaxy 223 says, bro. Crosslink says, OMG. Skekta says, Rylan Lilmya. From last says, OMG Silky. Ricocious says, LMAOO. Akbajai says, W Dad. Bertie Goldstein says, Wow at Silky really mad at Yost. Lazar 97 says, in my homeschool. Hush Sock says, you get the ace bottle. Tom Threezy says, STBL raid. Zesla says, is that I Shalfit. Tom Threezy says, she am late. Hollow Pix 3LL says, laser.
Preps mówi, włącz.
Synth Crib says, nah we up since SU holy shit. Patrick 3712 says, Silky the UNC. J Lottie 9 says, STBLL. Scooby 4K TV says, this is SLG. From last says, leave it to Beyonce gang. Monius Nuts Everything 00 says, stop singing.
Self-maturity. Oui.
Russ 00 says, Ushi.
Scooby Katuka DVD. Oui.
Skill issue 101 says, you good mama.
Oj gość ksmonja, holon.
Did a switching today at 5 says, oh. Crabsy says, Silk CMO and Big Do It for Emmy. Tree 555563 says, whatever lyrics you want. Hush Sock says, you get the ace bottle. Still Jade says, freaky chat. Ajiku says, dildos and ablick. Scooby 4K TV says, 32 years old with pimple patches by the way. 9 Stacked 7 says, Sanonian bought the whole store. Tunitana Choppa says, that's not fitting. Not Zach says, in Cali y'all gotta have y'all she in the trunk WTH. Zillis Santana says, Mars. Tree 555563 says, y'all seen one girl and blow up. Anilism 888 says, deadass. Chris Levels 1 says, the beer. King Kong says, the beers. Greg Too Smooth says, backseat. Mehmedov says, guys that's a real person by the way stop being weird. All Joe Muff says, how did he jump from 5k viewers to 18k in 30 minutes, who sent the raid? Minimon Spitting Popcorn Lil says, yo Skill has Silk ever told you when you guys are gonna collab? Rice Cooker 18 says, backseat. Akbajai says, backseat. Bagusu says, use backseat. Zukasarok 78 says, backseat. Luipi says, what's he doing? Korg 69 says, housewarming, who moving in chat. Taki Oisler says, 2 Velas cards. Greg Too Smooth says, LMAOOO. Aminox says, who's he getting TS for?
Alex 14 mówi,
Lily 956 says, you forgot Max. Ion Wanna Talk 000 says, you're a millionaire buy a Maybach truck at Silky.
Zero Mama Foggy. Oui.
Baba Band says, damn. Cave Loan says, last on total the IVAA. Rice Cooker 18 says, WHO that. Always God says, Hellcat. Nidpack says, Niji. Saint Laurent says, get a wide body. Explicit Boy says, get rid of this car. Moungerly says, this chat is so funny. Baba Band says, that MF roaring. ZPYN says, Jeekin on Molly Santana. Baba Band says, MMM. Zero Bamaphone says, so. 87 BBZ says, Unk might need a truck soon. Jasmine says, can't you put down the back seats to have more trunk space? Natamax says, laser gun walk home. Skill issue 101 says, first I will do the thing. Hero Kiroi says, bald spot. Lily 956 says, you forgot Max. Baba Band says, laser chill. Sam Ibid says, you scammed for sure. Black Joe 777 says, damn. DJRR13 says, damn. I've Lockham says, go damn. Shmeely 1629 says, easily best core member just because you a boozy glazer and you're mad funny. Nai 21 says, not even 800. Viewits 11225 says, shoulda clapped it. Tina B says, that's petty cash to you. Predator 43288 says, that's it. Maya 1 of 1 says, Walmart better. Blessed Jason says, he got money but I'm saying he should get a sub. Condone says, DoorDash Photography says, damn that getting taken out of lasers pay this month. Viewits 11,225 says, I knew it. Tina B says, you live daily you ain't gotta worry. J Dunes says, AEW Silk High. Ion Wanna Talk 000 says, buy a Maybach truck millionaire. The Envy Show says, time for the sub. Rip Germ says, Maybach truck callin' yo name. Anelism 888 says, Silk should collab with Post Malone. Paycorn Master says, Silky you cute as MF. PC 444 says, WW. Captain says, real. Kabina Live says, blah blah blah. Suzu Zero says, Silky take IT bro.
Tvugohhhhhbn mondja, szartnarcs.
Suzu Zero says, Silky take IT bro. Coroni 2019 says, HESA hero. Nowi's I says, my ears DH. Baba Bans says, this guy. Coroni 2019 says, HESA hero. No Topica says, G44G. No Heron Fist subscribed with Prime. DR Sasa says, W Hyundai. X Catcha says, Bob. Jovorst says, life. 98 Thou says, they pay people for TS gang. Brown as a potato says, Agent Sebastian. Skill issue 101 says, alright stop. Oddfunders says, yeah would get fired if you work there. Skill issue 101 says, alright stop jokes over guys. Cave Loan says, farming around Target is crazy. Scatuch says, in down 100 sold today. New Iorican says, card narc bro. Hob 024420 says, when boys turn to men. DoorDash Photography says, Jerry Wu is such a W. Anelism 888 says, what did you get Max? Mahogany says, pain. Dojinahu says, oh. Captain says, I know laser make a mean omelet. The ONXT door 1 says, eggs on top. Baba Band says, AOA. 33 Wraiths says, fave sound. ZTZXQ says, you. Into the Epicness says, you so overly woo. Demon OTP says, I wonder what his car smells like.
4月4日仍然这个青海沿岸。花费一个人的问题。
Fossabit says, subscribe to become SLG, twitch.tv subs Silky. Spoken L1S says, whose housewarming is it? Salashisti says, they not home by the way. Oplipi 1584 says, ib.
Tepres 50 hovorí, pre.
33 Wraiths says, ASAP Rocky. Queest says, play that young silk. Regudilin 1 says, save TS4 Disney gang. Bekendall says, isn't there a Oscars party coming up? Shmeely 1629 says, play some Uzi. Youngno says, great streams. Misty FCBB says, nothing would get secured. ITZ Yenny says, Igron's doing that. Paid since 5 says, when are we gonna get vlogs on YouTube at Silky? Flick63 says, Silky boo boo. M1 Length says, someone sub me. Paid since 5 says, when are we gonna get vlogs on YouTube at Silky? Urbanimus 827,483,748,484 says, bro throw that shit away. Greg Too Smooth says, bro. Youngno says, you a bad bitch. Fossabit says, Silky is 38 years old. Works D says, OD. SLG Bleach says, you're worse than Bill. Mahogany says, what? I got Gaines says, SLAYYYY. Luke 987,556 says, we want Cody new. Philippine 814 says, 3-star rated mouth. Brendan FN says, UA Mook. Say 5x5 says, any stable husband here.
Kajlone säger, Sonic.
Ball Hug Trickster says, yo at Silky you might be clone twin you ain't got sturdy in him. D4WN says, OMG bro. South 2426 says. Petterdigler says, SLAYY chocolate boy. Serum 177 says, oh no. Zukasarok 78 says, KKRKRKRKRKRKRKRKRKRKR.
Valinsk spune, lmawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawawaw
Tech. Shmeely 1629 says, this ep is fire. One up and says, what? Tukasarok 78 says, tvugohhhhbn can't drive. Squids E34 says, liquor broken. Sylph Matamerk says, that means stop spamming that Uzi nigga. Manifest Len G says, 0 suspensions. Sylph Matamerk says, that means stop spamming that Uzi niggaa. Anilisa 888 says, make my name purple. WTF. Font subscribed. Subscribe to tier 1. Anilisa 888 says, fuck you all. Kevin Dween says, put on some YB4ME and skill. It's 4 says, TS mid. Husley Pi says, Uzi ass. Brendan FN says, laser tell him play Halo or him. M0 Hemp says, Doug. Queest says, he was playing shit on the radio. Actual shit. Rafferty says, then this nigga gon' turn it up.
Nie 21 zegt, wederom.
Udemo 23 says, FXQC. Swindled says, play Anxiety by Lil Tony. She's Moo Odie says, ooh. Skill issue 101 says, my ears. Shrama says, bless you look like you trying to sneeze. Iralda Trax says, dork music. Calvx says, how do you spam Uzi new EP and not know the lyrics? Reefaeld says, A Smarty I says, a new kind of love. Urbaninus 827,483,748,484 says, 223. Skill issue 101 says, YB. Mama Loves says, this she ass keeps spamming same music damn bro. Smith says, Srusly yes. Aneelism 888 says, Post Malone. Ranabella 1408 says, Sidmus Walla. Grincham00 says, NAA my son no bow. Naily 14 says, WW song. M0 Hemp says, close the window I can hear shit at Silky. Pablomi0 says, TS tough. Skill issue 101 says, Kirik0 says, where he rotating Jorin. Skill issue 101 says, we want some bug SHI. Tyler Bishop says, not the vibe but. Mama Love says, change this shit. Lased Pop Dirt says, yo what car is that? Jim Janeskel says, 90s vibes. Queest says, laser grip his thigh for my immersion. Blossom 17 says, fade into YOUU. Krillilinen says, he don't know a single lyric by the way. Lased Pop Dirt says, fiery. La Undo says, it was good sex. Levi I Square says, song? Fossabit says, 2026 Mercedes AMG GT 63 Pro. Prestine says, I need whistles RN. Grincham00 says, Fadian to Yao. Qsley Pi says, Laser just gotta go mute at this point. Youngchin says, Fadi. Unknown Glock says, into. Doom0 Stritch says, Massey Star. Sis Mimi says, I love Massey Star shut up Silky let me listen. A Smarty I says, he got so excited. Bekendall says, you and this taco spot are obsessed. Paygorn Master says, good pull. Lightning Grin says, listen to Silver Lining by Law VTS Fire. Ricochet says, sorry. Prestine says, sending hate from Israel. Queest says, L0L. Aneelism 888 says, South 2426 says, Gate.